Welcome everyone to the new movies after midnight. We are flying solo as our own entity now, no longer under the Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles umbrella, which was I doubt that there's a large fandom speculating on things, but like it was a totally like
That's pretty harsh.
amicable decision. Well, I doubt that like I don't think a bunch of people are going to take to the Twitter sphere being like, "Oh, movies after midnight isn't on the Gentlemen for Cinephiles podcast
Ooh,
anymore."
Gentlemen Percent for
Like,
Cinephiles is gonna get canceled.
I don't. Yeah, it was a totally like amicable thing. Erin's just restructuring that podcast, and she actually was the one who was like, you should really keep movies after midnight going because like just in case someday they make a biopic about the two of us and like someone tries to construe that into like a conflict moment, which it, that's do you ever do that, like what if someone makes a biopic? And speaking of biopics, we are talking today about the current war, and to talk about it I have with me the person who recommended we cover the current war, Nick Smith.
Howdy,
How you doing?
I'm
'Cause
doing good.
yeah.
This is the third time now that I have watched the current war, and I love it as much now as I did the first time. So, spoilers, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it knowing you, I having watched it, it makes sense that you liked it because it is a very, it's I would refer to it. It's not quite a docudrama, but
It
it kind
almost is.
I
It's
like yeah, but basically it tells the story of Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, and
Westinghouse.
yeah, George Westinghouse, and the kind of conflict for I what is
The
it?
current war.
Yeah,
The
the
alternating indirect current conflict
yeah
during the late
over
1800s.
yeah over spreading electricity and everything.
Mm.
And yeah, it in some ways it kind of feels like when you would watch the History Channel and they would have like the documentary, but they would have those inserts where it's like a dramatization. It feels like someone just took those dramatization and gave them like
Legs.
a Hollywood budget and
Yeah.
just made a movie out of that.
And many great actors.
Yeah. So yeah, a little bit about the background of this film. It was I actually didn't look up the budget, but it was like a big budget studio production in 2018, I want to say, and and it was being produced by the Weinstein Company, and so it was basically scheduled to come out around the time everything happened and people realized Harvey Weinstein was a horrible person and like everything happened, and so that kind of like killed this film's momentum because like their biggest backer was on trial for being
Yeah.
awful, and so they pulled it out of theaters after a pretty short run, and they started working on this the current war director's cut, and they got a bunch of other people in on that. I noticed Timur Bekmambetov was one of the people among many others, and Martin Scorsese. You were saying he helped with the edit. I think he was an
Yeah.
executive producer.
Yeah. He helped Rahon, the director, um, and work together to allow reshoots as well uh,
Mm.
in the director's cut, which came out in 2019.
Yeah, so like a lot of people came together to like sort of give this movie another shot. And it's still, just because it didn't have a lot of marketing behind it, it's a film that I probably would not have heard of if you hadn't pointed it
Yeah.
out to me.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why it makes perfect discussion material for movies after midnight, because we talk about everything that is forgotten, glossed over, and slept on.
Mm. Yeah, it was really just that unfortunate timing because I remember seeing a trailer for it, I think in like 2015, 2016, like when I was in high school, and thinking, oh, that looks interesting. I like Cumberbatch, I like Nicholas Holt. I didn't know Tom Holland at the time, but Michael Shannon, I was down with anything with Michael Shannon.
Yeah.
And then like I never heard anything about it again, like at all. And then in like 2019, a good high school friend of mine, which we're both like massive like history class buffs, which is one of the reasons that we really liked this movie.
Yeah.
We both saw it in theaters because we are like, I thought that movie came out like 3 years ago. But then we saw it and we're very, very glad that we did. I do think um, going into it though with that frame of mind that this is kind of a history lesson in a way,
Yeah.
but it's an enjoyable one. Like I think that films like this should make up what historical films are.
Yeah, it's
More of
definitely.
this.
Yeah, that was the thing I noticed right away. Is it's a film that is very much made for history buffs because they place a lot of emphasis on places, on dates, on specific things. Like especially, I made a joke at the start of the movie. It feels like a Yakuza game because everyone got their little like they had like they walked up to I think P.T. Barnum was there and they introduced Westinghouse and he gets a little like this little title. It's like George Westinghouse, head of
Yeah.
everything. Thomas
George
Edison,
Westinghouse, head of everything.
third third lieutenant of the Tojo clan.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and that kind of like it tells you what kind of film this is going to be, where it's very much about the specifics and about the information. It's about the details just as much as it's about the actual like character narrative that's going on.
Because at the end of the day, it is a historical drama.
Yeah,
And it's, the drama is just as heavy as the history. There's very few of the actual like major details of it are fictionalized for the most case. For the most part, in most cases, it sticks to the facts. Maybe slightly dramatized versions, but at the end of the day, it kind of does function as a history lesson.
yeah. Though they do still, yeah, they definitely do tell a narrative story with it, but they
Mm-hmm.
are for the most part fixated on they don't let the story doesn't get in the way of what actually happened, like does happen sometimes
Yeah,
with these kind of
which
movies.
that kind of brings me to one of the parts I was going to mention. I'll let you get to your next point, but like one of the parts I was going to mention with because it's so focused on the facts, it does tend to kind of move really fast, especially at the start. It's
Yeah,
churning out fact after fact pretty quickly, like going from event to event, and that's kind of
yeah.
the course of the movie. It does kind of move pretty fast
Yeah, well, I noticed like it definitely moved a lot faster, especially at the beginning,
right out the
because
gate.
you have these moments that are important, but the moments happened like several years apart or whatever.
Hmm.
So they're like this happens and then they meet and then all of a sudden it's several years later and this happens and then all of a sudden we're getting introduced to Tesla and all of a sudden we're back with Edison
Yeah,
and like it does it threw me off at first, but by the end of the film I kind of got into it.
yeah. So
And
I think
again,
like
that's
knowing that going in probably helps the viewing experience.
yeah, and again, that's it's a movie that doesn't they're not like they made the effort to be like this is how it happened and they weren't like we're changing things so that all the important stuff happened in the space of 1 month because that like
Yeah.
which I think is something to like I guess worth talking about as like from a filmmaking perspective because that is a challenge where you're like this is what happened but also is that go like does changing the way things happened in the story get across what happened better on some
Hmm.
level?
Because
And like I think they
there's a lot of stories that are more interesting to read than they are to watch. So I understand why a lot of times they tend to condense these down, but a good thing this film did was it kind of avoided that as much as possible.
yeah. Well, I think the tempo helped condense it without making it feel unnatural.
Yeah.
Um what else? Also cinematographically
Hmm.
this movie it's a very pretty movie. I don't like
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of shots I noticed sometimes and maybe this is just me not getting it, but like there are some movies where you watch and you're like, these shots are really pretty, and I don't know, like, there's not necessarily a narrative reason for this shot to look like this, but they
They
just
look
did
good
it anyway.
just to look good. It's
Like,
just
there's lots of
pretty.
wide shots and like big shots of these like crowded train stations and
Mm.
cities, and
It's like maybe they don't serve a specific purpose with the narrative, but they definitely look very nice.
but yeah, it does look nice. Nobody could ever
Which,
say this movie
yeah,
does not look really good.
which I think for those we have cinematographer Chung Hoon Chung to
Oh yeah,
thank.
you were talking about.
Yeah, Chung Hoon Chung, who is a Korean
Yeah.
filmographer. He he's done some stuff like The Handmaiden, mostly Korean stuff.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't know it was in the
he
Handmaiden.
did The Handmaiden and he did Old Boy,
Yeah, the
2003, the good
original,
one, the good
the
Korean
original
one,
Old Boy.
which I still need to see. I've been told that it's a Kino. I need to see it, but he's pretty seasoned. And after seeing his filmography in the current war and really liking it, really liking the cinematography there, that's even more reason for me to look forward to the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which he is doing the cinematography
Oh
for,
yeah,
which that's got me even more hype. But
yeah,
that's for another time.
yeah, and he has collaborated with. This was directed by Alfonso Gomez Rejon,
Mm.
who yeah, he hasn't done a lot. He did what's the other movie?
Let me see. Rohan
It
did
was like three names.
Me and Earl and the
Me
Dying
and Earl and the
Girl.
Dying Girl. Yeah, that was like I think his breakout kind of movie, and he is
Yeah.
currently working on I can't remember the name of it, but it's a movie about Walter Cronkite covering JFK's
Newsflash.
death. Newsflash, yeah, and because that's another historical film, that'll be interesting to see because he did. It seemed like he showed in this film that he's good at covering history in a very,
Hmm.
I guess, kinetic is another word you could use to describe this movie. Everything is very like, even outside the pacing, like a lot of things are moving and happening, and it does feel kind of frantic, which
Yeah.
makes sense for like how everyone's going back and forth. So yeah, I guess we
In a
could.
way, that pacing makes a large degree of sense from the very
Yeah,
start, going from the Westinghouse breaks all the way up to the moving machinery and stuff like that. Everything is
yeah,
electric, everything is moving, everything is running. It's very powered, and that makes a lot of sense for the subject
yeah.
matter of
It's
the
like
movie.
fast moving machinery, and also just the mindset of everyone involved, where they're like,
Everyone's like, "We gotta go, we gotta
especially
get
yeah.
moving."
So yeah, so I guess if you're not familiar with the historical narrative, we can kind of give a summary of that.
Mm.
So yeah, we're introduced. We start kind of following Thomas Edison and his family, um, and I can't
Kind of
remember
with
what
his
exactly they're doing.
early inventions, kind of showing his first showing of the incandescent bulb working, um, is like the very first scene. Then moving
Mhm.
into like the gramophone and
Yeah,
things of that nature, making these deals with J.P. Morgan, which
yeah, and Tom Holland plays
Samuel Insull,
yeah
who is
Insel, and he's like
Edison's secretary, but provides this kind of nice foil, like slightly more human foil for the more
yeah.
cold Edison.
I was saying that is the one thing I noticed about this movie is like Thomas like it's starting to change because like I always grew up being told, oh, Thomas Edison was this inventor. And, like, as I got older, I started hearing from pretty much everyone Thomas Edison was a dick. He stole everything he made. There's not one single good redeeming quality about Thomas Alva Edison. But, like, this movie did a good job, it didn't shy away. I heard it compared to kind of how Lin-Manuel Miranda played Alexander Hamilton, where it's like, they portray him in a sympathetic light, but they also don't shy away from the
Yeah.
fact that he crossed the line on several
Mm.
occasions.
They show that he's human without also being apologetic for his actions and his behavior.
Yeah, it's like what he did was wrong, but very few human beings are evil.
Yeah. And that
And
was the
I
thing that
like
I
that
really liked that about this movie because
kind of objectivity.
very it could have been so easy for them to just say, hey, this is everyone take a big fat steamy dump on Thomas Edison, the movie, which I still would have watched and probably liked.
Yeah, no.
But the fact that they didn't do that, that they took the challenge of, all right, Edison is one, kind of a bad guy, two, human, and one of the main characters of this film, and therefore needs to be depicted as human and needs to go through an arc
Yeah.
that is very human. And Cumberbatch, perfect choice for the role.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Honestly, it like he kind of came from the same place that Sherlock and Stephen Strange at the start of Doctor Strange. Like he kind of put that same kind of characterization into him.
Cumberbatch kind of has a he has his sights
Yeah.
set on that kind of role because
That
that's
yeah.
he does it really well.
Yeah. That said, I think this is probably some of the best acting I've seen Tom Holland do.
Real, like legit acting.
Yeah.
Like, it
Um.
definitely showed his range. Which it's funny to point out that this movie uh, was done before Spider-Man.
Oh,
They filmed it before
that's
Civil
funny.
War.
Um. Yeah, because like you said, he's like Edison's one friend who's kind of with him throughout everything, and who kind of like when Edison crosses the line, he's like his friend, but he also calls him out and is like,
Mm.
"I always admired you not just for your genius, but for your principles, and now you're." Like they have a really good relationship that you see, and that again, it goes back to Edison was kind of a dick, and he did a lot of like objectionable things, but he was not evil, and he has this humanity in his life.
And that balance
Um,
that Insole provides is very necessary because
yeah,
without Insole's character, without Holland's character, um, Cumberbatch's Edison would not be nearly as relatable or human. Insole keeps the character grounded both in the actual story and narratively, keeps
yeah.
him grounded and keeps kind of
Also,
shows that human element of his character.
yeah. Also, something they deal with early on is the Edison's wife dying of.
It's a
I don't think
brain
they said
tumor.
what it was. That
I
would
believe it
make
was a brain
sense.
tumor, something like that.
Um, but they his wife is played by Tuppence Middleton, and she didn't have a lot of
Mm.
scenes because her character dies kind of early on, but she did a really good job, I think, like portraying like this character who's at the center of a lot of things, because like her condition is worsening, so she's struggling to like she's struggling with like some mental deterioration, but also she still like very much cares about her husband, but she's also disappointed because he's very much like jacked into his work and forgets to spend time with his family, and like she's dealing with all of this, and like in the handful of scenes you see her in, like you really get a sense of how like d- how sort of overwhelmed she is dealing with all of this.
Hmm.
And like it was a really solid performance for someone who
Yeah.
only shows up for maybe the first like eighth of the movie.
And I would say kind of a similar thing about Catherine Watterson's Marguerite Westinghouse,
Yeah.
who she is a good actress. I think she's kind of a little underrated because I liked her a lot in Fantastic Beasts as Tina. Um,
Hmm.
but I liked her even more in this, even though her role
Didn't
was
realize that was
somewhat
the same.
diminished.
Didn't
Yep, that
realize
was
that was
her.
the same actress.
Yep. Um, Even though her
Yeah, there were
role
a lot of good.
was slightly diminished in this, while she was there, she showed they really played up the fact that Margaret Westinghouse was a partner with her husband in the company, and
Yeah.
that she was a very smart woman,
What is
and
there's
they
that
displayed
line?
that.
There's like a line where he what was it?
He was asking her about like the speed of sound,
No,
or
there's
like
another
quizzing
line
her
where
on stuff.
they're like, "Are you sure you want to do this? What would your wife say?" And
Oh
he's like,
yeah, he was like,
she's the one who gave me the idea."
yeah, when he was thinking about stealing the letters that Edison was making advising the creation of
Yeah.
the electric chair. He's like, oh, what would your wife think? Ah, she's the one who put me up to it.
Yeah, so that's kind of we're introduced to Edison and we go through all this stuff, and at the same time we're introduced to Westinghouse,
Mm,
who basically he realizes that direct current like has the potential to reach places that alternating current couldn't. Is that
Other way around.
okay? Yeah.
Alternating current,
could reach places direct
yeah,
current couldn't.
and that
And
while direct current would require many more like power stations all over, that he kind of realizes, alternating current could make the distance and therefore save people money, and decides to seize that business opportunity.
he basically gets into it for business reasons, and then the competition between the two kind of like slowly kind of drums up, and it like it does, like, you do get that thing where for Westinghouse this is just a business thing, and for Edison he takes it very personally, because I like that, because I think a lot of people with the idea that Edison kind of took advantage of a lot of other people to get where he was, that he was some greedy industrialist. And the way this movie is, like, for Edison it's not, at least in this movie, it's not about the money, it's about the glory more than anything. And so he takes it very personally that like when Westinghouse starts competing with him for bids and everything, and that kind of eventually, I'm skipping over a little bit here, but eventually, Edison has this idea where he's like, where he's like, they start, his whole thing is, he realizes the one sort of thing he can leverage against Westinghouse is by feeding into this idea that alternating current is more dangerous and less safe. And so he starts going around where he's like, see, this is an alternating current machine, and I can shock this horse and it'll die.
Yeah.
Because that's how electricity works. But
the best parts about that is that's real. Like, that wasn't fictionalized
that was
for
an
the
actual
movie.
Thing that happened.
It's this smear campaign against Westinghouse because he's so passionate about it.
And I can't remember the actual person's name, but the actor that plays him he was both in The Mummy Returns as one of the three thieves, and he was the gravedigger in Van Helsing, I think. But
that was Southwick Brown, the human rights advocate.
He approaches Edison and he's like, electrocution seems like it would be way more humane to use to kill prisoners as opposed to hanging. And Edison's like, no, nothing I make is, I can't remember how he said it.
I'll never make a device that'll take a human life, which was kind of continuation from the beginning when the military wanted to offer him contract to make some kind of weapon, and he turned it down because he doesn't want his name associated with anything that kills someone.
Yeah. And but eventually he goes back to that guy and is like, I'll tell you how to do this as long as you tell everyone that it's a Westinghouse current that's killing this guy, because he's like, I'll
defame him.
Yeah. And then eventually and he's like, burn this correspondence, I don't want my name tied to it. And the guy's like, I'm not going to burn a letter that was sent to me by Thomas Edison. This is nuts. And so eventually those Westinghouse finds those letters and kind of uses them against Edison. And it kind of like, that's kind of, if there's a narrative theme in this film, I think that's really what it is what competition and stuff kind of pushes people towards. Because I don't think, like, I don't think either of them have, like, really ill intentions, and, like, things kind of get ugly as something I've been talking about in life, really, is what is it? Most bad things that people do to each other, I feel like you could trace back to some kind of, like, fear or insecurity of losing something. And I think that's really kind of how things work in this film, where, like, neither of them have bad intentions, but Edison lets that in. Not even insecurity, but, like, they talk about how they very much emphasize.
He's territorial.
Yeah, Edison wants to. I think Westinghouse even has a line where he's like, Edison wants to be remembered. He's terrified of being forgotten, and all I care about is leaving behind a legacy.
Which is very intentional, because that's what happened.
Yeah,
you don't get Westinghouse being talked about in history classes.
Yeah,
at least not any that I took.
Which is again why this movie's kind of important, because it.
Yeah.
But you definitely get that where, like, Edison's didn't have terrible intentions, but he let that kind of insecurity and that defensiveness turn it like turn him down a road that got worse and worse. And then in the middle of this, we're slowly introduced. I thought Tesla was going to be like a major character, and he was kind of more of a side character.
Yeah, he was kind
In
of
this.
the tertiary character being kind of tossed between Edison and Westinghouse.
Yeah,
Um, the movie was certainly not about Tesla,
yeah. Which
although
ironically,
Tesla's go.
like even from what you get in this film, that kind of is fitting for how like it seems like Tesla was this guy who was like had all this knowledge behind him and nobody took him seriously.
Hmm. That for the most part he kind of just hung kind of behind the scenes for a lot of it.
Uh, well, it's
Did
I
not
can't
achieve
remember.
the same kind of fame, glory, or money,
There was
especially not the money.
one of those oof lines was um when because they established Tesla worked for Edison, then he leaves and then he tries to start his own company and uh this the guy who's kind of backing him is like you're not doing what I told you, so I'm firing you. And he's like, no, we can do this and this. And he's like, oh, you're just an immigrant, what do you know? And that's like one of those major oof lines that sort of
Because that's how
you
Tesla
could
was
apply,
treated.
yeah,
That's
and
it's
you can
accurate.
apply that to a lot today, but like it is, yeah, he was not an American, so everyone was like, what could he know?
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate because like and like it's not they actually touched on it in this movie a little, but like he had that idea for like wireless electricity and stuff, and like Tesla had these like crazy ideas that he probably could have made work if he would have had backing, but nobody wanted to back him because he was the crazy Serbian guy. And they definitely do a good job of depicting that, I think.
Yeah. And
And Nickel,
while Tesla's role is again more connective fiber than like the actual meat of the story, where he is good, important, and is well done. Nicholas Hoult did a very good job as Tesla. One of the
yeah,
better depictions of Tesla I have seen. Um, Slightly better than David Bowie, just a little.
forgot about that.
Man, Tesla has really not been depicted in movies a whole lot, and where he has been depicted, it's not been very accurate. So while
He was
Holt's
depicted on
Tesla was decent, it was pretty good and a whole lot better than what we've seen before in other films.
yeah. Also, we were talking before the podcast about how Nicholas Hoult is another actor that's really good and kind of slept on.
Criminally slipped on. Holt is good in everything.
Yeah. And then, yeah, we've talked about him before, but Michael Shannon as George Westinghouse. He's kind
Shannon
of,
is great.
yeah. If there's a protagonist in this movie, I feel like it's kind of Westinghouse. Well, I mean, again, like Edison is kind of as much like there's not really an antagonist,
No, it's
but
about
like
the dichotomy between Westinghouse and Edison,
I
but
think
it's
yeah,
just a
Westinghouse
little bit
does
more
kind of
towards
come out. He's not
Westinghouse because
Thomas
he won.
Edison, so he looks like a slightly
I
better
mean,
person.
in the end, Westinghouse was the winner, so
Yeah,
it's just a hair more about him.
yeah, and
And
you
Michael
get
Shannon was perfect.
yeah, yeah, where he gets yeah, he very much comes across as kind of a very like no nonsense kind of person,
Hmm.
and I think that's kind of the difference because they like when they establish Westinghouse's like war service, there's this like flashback scene they keep going back to, which honestly it feels like it would have been like a character introduction in like a like if you just stuck that scene into the Hateful Eight and had was Westinghouse no or Westinghouse like if you just stuck Michael Shannon into the Hateful Eight, that would have been a great introductory scene for him.
Hmm.
This is like this Confederate soldier's got a gun on him, and he's like, "Oh, is that a
Is that a
whatever?"
new
Because it's
new model army?
and he's like, "Oh, is this because?" And like you don't get to the end of the flash. They kind of keep revealing more of it like as the film goes on. He's like, "Oh, because they did this, and this," but the really interesting thing about that is that in the rain, it still doesn't.
He's like, because this whole encounter is happening during the rain, and he's explaining how the new mechanism allows the hammer to not sit on an empty chamber and not uh, not pose the risk of going off in your pocket, therefore allowing you to have all the cylinders loaded. And as he's saying that, as this encounter in the rain's going, the guy kind of tilts his gun up a little bit to kind of look at it. And he's like, but the most amazing part is, despite all that, doesn't change the fact that you just wet all your powder. And then he just shoots him.
Yeah, but they keep coming back to West. Yeah, it's a good scene. But they keep coming back to Westinghouse as having served and Edison as like having being this guy's like nothing I make will have killed anyone, and I think that's the difference they illustrate, where like they both do the same stuff, but Edison is kind of in denial, whereas Westinghouse is more of a realist, and he's like, I did this, and that was kind of like the handful of things. Where he's like he's leveraging stuff against Edison, or when he's suing him. He understands that what he's doing is objectionable and feels kind of bad about it, whereas Edison kind of justifies everything he does.
I think it's
And that's
interesting
really what
that
the difference that they put down between the two characters.
and I think it's interesting that the characters end up that way, because at the end of it, you get the sense that Edison is kind of a bad person in a lot of ways, and Westinghouse isn't. Westinghouse is all right. But
Yeah,
just on paper, you would think that the more passionate, emotion driven inventor who's not driven by money, but instead just wants to be important, going up against the more business opportunity guy who has killed people before, you would think
yeah,
that the latter would be the more cold hearted bad guy,
yeah,
but it's actually the opposite. And the way that they
yeah.
balanced that with those characters
Especially,
was
yeah,
it was new. It was fresh. It was different.
yeah. Especially, honestly, this is probably the most sympathetic character I've seen Michael Shannon play. I've seen him like usually he's only played literal villains,
Mm-hmm.
like
Because in
the
Knives
Knives Out,
Out,
Superman.
Superman, in I think it was Mud with Matthew McConaughey, he was a bad guy in that.
Mm,
He usually plays bad guys, and it was great to see Michael Shannon as a good guy, and I would very much like to see more Michael Shannon as a good guy. If there's probably more of it out there, one of these days I'm gonna have to do like a Michael Shannon deep dive and just start watching a bunch of films with him in it, because
yeah,
his great performance. That does kind of bring me to one thing I was going to say about this movie, and maybe one of the only slightly negative things is that it had a decent script. It did a lot of cool things in the story, really good cinematography, very pretty. But the performances by these actors was probably the strongest part, what really the backbone of all of it. If you
yeah,
had switched any of these actors out, I feel like the movie would not have been nearly as good as it was. So I think
yeah.
the casting director, yeah, is as much to thank for this as
Oh yeah,
anything.
yeah. And I think that's one of those things where like it's not that it was written poorly. It's that I think that's where it gets into they tried to be accurate, so they weren't going to embellish things to make
Mhm.
they weren't going to add what wasn't there to make it more interesting.
Yeah, they only did that twice, really, as far as I know, from the research I've done. The only parts in this film that were not historical were the flashback scene with Westinghouse duping that dude into wetting his powder. As far as I can tell, that's not a real story. Although Westinghouse did serve in the Civil War um, for the Union, um, and the other part being at the beginning, a part towards the beginning where
Yeah,
Edison has a meeting with Westinghouse. This is the very beginning before Westinghouse has even gotten into electric. He just does brakes, steam brakes, air brakes
yeah,
for trains. Um, Edison decides that he's tired, has done enough for the day, and just blows him off, and his train keeps going and moves past.
yeah,
And while that was an important part for the story of the movie, it was one of the only major details that was fictional.
yeah, yeah. Which, like you said, I think it does sort of provide context. In some ways, it makes you like, because again, it gives Edison a moment like I think it's important in terms of the story that Edison doesn't blow him off because he's like, F that guy. He blows him off because he's like, my kids are tired and they want to go home.
Hmm. You
And like,
understand why he did it. It was a
yeah,
dick move,
and I
but you
think
understand why
having
he did
that,
it.
yeah, I think if you cut that scene out, it would kind of change how you view the characters. So I think it is like, yeah, it definitely works. Which is this is the director's cut, and I'm kind of interested to see what changed.
Yeah. I know it was mostly editing and some reshoots was
Yeah.
like most of what it was. I think from something I was reading, I think the scene of Insel um, pitching after Edison Electric has been sold out and turned into
Mhm.
General Electric, and Edison ousted from his own company. Um, they have uh, Tom Holland, Samuel Insel going and like pitching to investors, which is also a good scene because he's done all this research and he spends all his time really selling. Because Edison tells him like the two kind of people. There's the kind that only think with their
Yeah.
wallets, and then there's the dreamers who want to be sold on something fantastic. And so Insol's whole deal is um, building up all this fantastical invention to sell to the dreamers. The reason I brought that up is because I think parts of that scene were reshoots.
Mhm.
But I like how that scene is then contrasted by immediately after he's done spending like the whole time just selling all this fantastical invention and using all these fancy words, just pouring his heart out into selling to these investors. Then Westinghouse comes in after, and they're like, Mr. Westinghouse, please try to keep your presentation to under 40 minutes. He's like, that won't be a problem. Here's my bid. Oh, these are your numbers. Why should we invest in Westinghouse? Well, it's cheaper and it's better. Nice seeing you. And then he just leaves.
Yeah.
The Chad
I mean,
Westinghouse.
good. Yeah, that's. I was joking. This is pretty much the Chad Westinghouse versus the Virgin Edison, the movie.
Much.
Um,
Literally, because Edison doesn't have a wife by the end of it. Westinghouse still
yeah,
does.
yeah. Oof. Yeah.
It's horrible.
But yeah, she died of a brain tumor, loser.
That's what you get for hanging around Edison.
uh, yeah. I liked in that scene when Insult goes in. Someone, I think it's Westinghouse's wife, is like, but he's like, she's like, he's
He's
12.
12. It's like,
Which
yeah,
is,
that's my reaction when he
yeah.
first got cast as
That's what
Spider-Man.
everyone says when they see Tom Holland. I don't know what it is.
He's 12. He's older than me.
Yeah, I think he might be older than me. If not older than me, I think he's a
I think
couple
he's.
years younger than
I think
me.
he might be your age. Hold on.
He's
No,
yeah,
no, 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 no.
he is younger than or older than I
Okay,
thought he
he's
was.
between you and me, who's born in '96,
Oh, okay,
but he's a year older than me. He's basically
yeah,
like one of my friends in my D&D group is the same age as him, which is surreal to think about.
yeah,
A lot of talent in a young actor.
yeah. No, especially like yeah, and now he's got that like Marvel reputation, so like you can do kind of
Yep.
um. Yeah, I think we've gone through all my notes that I had.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah, they do. At the very end, they kind of like have a moment where Edison and Westinghouse kind of not bury the hatchet necessarily, but are like
They have a mutual understanding,
yeah.
kind of at the end at the World's
And
Fair.
at the very end, they show Edison getting into the
Film.
what was it? I can't remember what specifically his invention was called,
Mm.
but the kinetoscope or whatever. But
Yeah, film,
yeah,
filmmaking,
and that
motion,
yeah, and
motion
that goes
pictures.
yeah, and so that goes into a whole other chapter of history that I know more about because film school tells you about it. Where like he interestingly I mean he kind of took, I think it was the Lumieres had like a working camera, and Edison kind of, I think at the same time it seemed like he took their ideas, but I think it was more of a two people had the same idea at the same time in different places kind of deal. But it was those were the two like people who were making cameras and so Edison was a really big force in the like early days of silent films. And actually, one of the reasons that Hollywood ended up getting set up on the West Coast was because all the filmmakers were like, because basically they needed to escape Edison's grasp, so they were like, we're going to go as far away from the East Coast as humanly possible. And so Thomas Edison is directly responsible for Los Angeles, California being the city it is today.
Yet another thing
Which
Edison
is,
ruined.
maybe the worst thing he's done. But yeah, they kind of like, they don't cover that, but they do nod to it, and that's kind of where Edison's story ends. Is you see him in a theater,
watching
showing,
the footage of Niagara Falls, which is,
which is a
the importance of Niagara Falls is kind of poetic there, because it ends the very first shot, like the first like 30 seconds or something of the movie are actually at the filming at Niagara Falls. So it's kind of,
yeah.
it brought that full circle. The movie begins and ends with Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is important because it's where Edison
Yeah.
filmed using the camera developed by William Kennedy Dickinson, by the way, who developed Edison's motion picture camera. Never gets mentioned. But it is also mentioned because that's where I believe Edison and his wife spent their honeymoon when they first got married, but like Edison spent the whole time working. And it's also important because it is Niagara Falls that Tesla and Westinghouse form an agreement on, that Tesla builds his motor there to harness the power of Niagara Falls to generate electricity. So that was kind of like the big final blow of Edison's kind of downfall, and Westinghouse's kind of victorious move there. So it's very poetic, the importance of Niagara through the whole thing.
Yeah. Which again is like stuff that really happened, so it's funny that like it worked that way.
Yeah. Sometimes reality makes such a good story that you don't have to change anything. And that's what I love about history. And that's what I love about movies like this that are able to not alter history too much. They're able to preserve the spirit of what actually happened and just kind of take the natural poetry of reality.
Yeah.
Which sounded way pretentious when I said it, but
you know.
Hey, we're on a film podcast. We can get away with it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's the thing. This was a very good like historical film that was very objective without, but still able to tell a good story. And yeah, like we were talking about, it's a solid film that got, because of when it came out and the unfortunate kind of circumstances, it didn't get nearly the platform that it should have.
Which makes it the perfect candidate for this podcast. Criminally slept on. So many people were very critical of this movie. I haven't seen the original. We kind of talked about the difference between the director's cut, which
I haven't looked at like other people's reviews.
All I know is that most reviews I've looked at, people who watched the original didn't like it. People who watched the director's cut did like it. And the rare account where I've seen where people have seen both, one of the ones I read, I can't remember from where, but a guy said, I don't know what they changed in the director's cut, but it made it a lot better. It's something that they did made it a whole lot better. Yeah. But I'm glad that the director's cut came out. I'm glad I got to see it in theaters when that came out.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I've been able to show it to my whole family now, because it is a good movie, and it's given me the excuse to watch it a total of 3 times with a good friend, with my parents, and now with my sister. So it all works. It's a great film to continue watching. It's rare for me personally to be able to watch a movie more than once and still enjoy it and still sit through it all the way. That's the weird thing about me. Like, if I've seen a movie once, I enjoy it. It could be a great movie. I could rate it 4 stars or something, and then next time just never want to watch it all the way through again. Like, sometimes it's just a one-time experience. This movie was not that. I feel like there's different details of it that I gain more of an appreciation of each time that I watch it.
Yeah, and that's I also have very few movies that I feel like that, and it didn't quite do that for me. But again, I think this is a film that's it was still a very good movie, but I think it's a film that's very much geared towards the history buff. So if you're
As
that
as
kind
a
of
history
person,
nerd, you're gonna enjoy this movie a lot
yeah,
more than your average Joe. But there is still enough substance and enough artfulness to it that an average non-history buff can still enjoy it. But you're gonna
yeah,
enjoy it a lot more if you're a history nerd.
yeah, kind of like Chef with cooking. Like
Which
if
is
you're a
another
normal
movie I really
person,
like.
yeah, if you're a normal person, it'll be a good movie. But if you're like into that niche, then it's like
Mm. That's what I
really
love
your
about
jam.
those kind of movies is that they know their target audience and it's kino for that target audience, but it's still really solid for everyone else. And that's kind of the principle of good filmmaking is like know your target audience, but make sure that at the end of the day you are telling a good story and not just doing fan service to a specific group of people, but you actually are making a good piece of art. And
Yeah.
this film did that.
So yeah, I
I
think
rate it
we've
I
come
rate
up
it
with.
4 stars. Nick says check it out.
As I say, I think we've just come up with like 7 or 8 different ways to say the current war was good and you should go see it now.
Current
So
War,
I think
good.
that's
Watch it. You can watch it on Showtime. You can watch it on
yeah.
Hulu with Showtime. Uh, you might be able to rent it from like Vudu. I'm not sure where else you can stream it. It is also available on Blu-ray. I want to say you can buy it from one of the websites. Yeah, I think it might also be
Yeah,
on Prime,
I
maybe.
saw it last time I was out and about. I did see it at like Target, which
Okay,
like I don't know if it's still like on shelves, but it did have like a major retail release, so
yeah.
not too hard to get a hold of.
This is one of the few movies I actually want to own on physical media. I definitely need to get myself a copy of that because good one. So yeah, you got options.
Yeah.
Definitely look into it. I high key suggest it.
So yeah, yeah, Nick, do you wanna? Is there any place on social media you want to plug yourself
Oh
as
yeah.
our?
Um, I don't know. I'm not really doing a whole lot on social media much these days. If you want to occasionally see my art, there's N Smith Portraits, the letter N SMITH Portraits.
Yeah.
Um, my personal Instagram is private because I post political rantings. Uh,
That's pretty good.
yeah. Aside from that, if you want to see me talk about movies more and just keep watching this podcast, eventually you'll see me
Yeah,
again.
yeah. Nick will be a regular guest on here. We'll see who else we can get on here. But yeah, and this felt like a good movie to sort of rein in rein in the new movies after
The
midnight. I'll
new
be putting
season.
Yeah, I'll be re-uploading all the old Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles movies after midnights as kind of a or archival stuff. But yeah, I'm still figuring out the release schedule. But yeah, we got a lot of new stuff on the horizon. Yeah, for me, you can find me on this show. On basically, I'm kind of probably going to start consolidating this podcast and my YouTube stuff into one thing. So it's sort of like all my reviews on one place. So EV Override and Movies After Midnight on pretty much everything. So that's where you can find me. And yeah, aside from that, we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers.
Deuces.